your channel
His plague
to YouTube.
Come for me, big dog.
Demonetized. Good evening, good morning, YouTube salutations, wherever you're at. So I thought I'd do an update for Historathon and kind of use this as a reading update. Most of my reading this year thus far has been nonfiction, so I'll go ahead and use the Historathon hashtag and kind of do a bit of a Historathon update. If you're seeing this and you are not familiar with Historathon, it is a booktube event that divides the year up into 4 categories. The first quarter of the year, so it's done in quarters. The first quarter of the year is prehistory to the year 500. The second quarter is the year 500 to 1500. The third quarter is 1500 to 1820, and then the fourth quarter is 1820 to the modern day. So for me personally, my 2 quarters of interest would be quarter 2 and quarter 3. But I have read 2 books that fall into the quarter 1 criteria, although I have actually read a few other nonfiction books. I've had a pretty good month thus far. I've read 7 books. I started another one, 2 of them actually, and I'm currently reading 2 books right now. And that doesn't even include all the short stories I've been reading. So I've had a pretty good month reading wise. Usually winter is, my best reading time of the year because I'm not working on my house. I don't have as much to do. I don't work quite as much during the winter. But I'll go ahead and go over. I wrote some stuff down, so if you see me look down, that's why. I apologize for that. I have a pretty good memory, but I also, want to make sure I touch on everything I want to. So, and I don't have a teleprompter. So, anyway, so the first book that I read for Historathon is Alexander the Great by Philip Freeman, which is pretty short for an Alexander the Great biography. There's quite a few of them out there. I've read other Alexander the Great biographies before, but I was interested in this author, and I will probably read more work by him because I did really enjoy it. I'll put the cover right here. I probably would have already put it here by now because all these books, except for one that I'll mention here at the end, I don't own a hard copy for. I use my library, and I almost read, I'd say 90% of my books I read digitally. So I tend to read, just digital books. I don't own a bunch of hard copies of everything. If I really like a book, I'll buy a hard copy just to own it. So I probably, compared to most booktubers, just don't own that many books, but I own quite a few, but not a ton. I actually plan on doing a bookshelf tour. Somebody asked about what was on my bookshelf, and I thought that might actually be a good idea for a video. I'd probably have to break it up into a couple, if I touch every book and talk about it. But anyway, but the first book I read was Alexander the Great. It was very good. I found myself really most intrigued in the beginning of it when it was covering Philip of Macedon, who's Alexander the Great's father, who was really just as interesting as Alexander the Great, in my opinion. And it did cover it pretty well. So it's like all the stuff in Greece and Philip of Macedon's like my favorite part of it, to be honest. But I still enjoyed the whole book. Like I said, it wasn't very long. It's certainly not definitive. But if you just want a refresher about Alexander the Great, I think it's a pretty good place to go. It's like I said, it's a really solid narrative. Read very fluidly. I don't know if I'll ever read it again. I might, because like I said, for it being kind of short, I thought it was pretty good. So I wish there would have been more Philip of Macedon stuff, but that's not really the author's fault. So it makes me want to go and read more stuff about Philip of Macedon, to be honest. For those of you who don't know, Alexander the Great, a lot of the military tactics and all that stuff he inherited basically from Philip of Macedon. That's not to say Alexander the Great wasn't a great commander, because he was, but the point is a lot of that stuff, the military reforms and stuff, was done by Philip of Macedon. So anyway, the next book I'm going to talk about is Conquistadors by Buddy Levy. I'll put the cover right here. This was a fantastic book. It might be one of my best reads of the year. I'll tag this channel in the description. I actually discovered this book from Jeff Reed's History on his channel. I saw him talk about it. If I can find which video he specifically talks about it, I will link it in the description. But if you want some good history recommendations, I definitely go check Jeff Reed's Histories out. He puts a lot of great books on his channel. There's a few he's talked about that I have read. I know he's talked about Dan Jones on there, but there were a few others. He talked about the Gulag Archipelago. I don't think he's read it yet, but he had it on like his TBR. There was a few others I had read before that he talked about. But anyway, great taste in books, good insights on some books. So maybe if you're like on the fence about some stuff, check them out. But anyway, Conquistadors is fantastic. It covers Hernan Cortez and his meeting with Montezuma, and then kind of the invasion and conquest of Mexico. It's such a fascinating period in history. I found a really good article about kind of the weaponry and stuff of the era, and I'll link that in the description as well. What's so interesting about it is it's like a crossroads in history when it comes to that military technology, because they have cannons and muskets, but they are still using, crossbows and bows and, halberds and spears, and it's really fascinating. They're kind of like in this middle time with their armor and stuff. So just that alone is I could read a whole book just about that. It's so interesting to me. And obviously they had a technological advantage over the tribes that were there. So it is just which is the Aztecs. And it's just really fascinating to see. There was some stuff I learned from that. It had been a while. I guess it had been a while since I've seen anything about Hernan Cortez, because he's a pretty well-known historical figure. The governor of Cuba, Vasquez, I think that's his name, is Vasquez. They had a little, obviously, Cortez does a lot of this stuff, kind of against, the governor of Cuba's will, and they almost got a fight over it, and there's like intervention by Spanish government officials to stop it, and so Cortez really had a lot of stuff going against him, and he still was quite successful. Of course, it's a great tragedy what happened, all the stuff we lost of the great Aztec culture, but it's a really fascinating point in history, and like I said, it talks a lot about like kind of how they had like a regiment of crossbowmen, a regiment of just I want to say just regular archer bowmen, musketeers. Of course, they had artillery. It's just really interesting to see that. And, maybe I'll put the map up here of Cortez's kind of invasion route, because I like maps, so I always like looking at things like that. But everything from like, when they were under siege in the great Aztec city, and just, if it really wasn't for, the Aztecs, getting, plague, it might not have gone so well for the Spaniards. So anyway, but it's a really fascinating, really riveting read, man. I really enjoyed that. That might be one of my best reads of 26. And I'll be honest, I would read this book again. I really liked it that much. I guess I know I've read some other stuff about Cortez before. Maybe I've just caught it in ancient or not ancient, what medieval warfare magazine is where I know a lot of that stuff from. But anyway, or maybe just like the History Channel or something. But because I did know some things going into it. But anyway, it's a really great read. So again, I'll put that link in the description, and again, I'll tag Jeff Reads History, because that's where I got this from, and that guy talks about a lot of great books. So definitely check his channel out. So the next thing I read was Templars by Dan Jones. Dan Jones is one of my favorite nonfiction authors. I've read, this is probably like the 6th Dan Jones book I've read. Because I've read The Plantagenets, War of the Roses, what was the other one? Oh, this Henry V biography, which I'm going to talk about very soon on the channel. You might see a video soon where I talk about that book. And then I read his first 2 books in his fiction series, which is Ex's Dogs, and then I cannot remember the title. It's The Wolves of Winter, I think, is the second one. But I feel like I might be getting that mixed up with the third one, because one of them, hopefully I didn't get that mixed up. No, I think Wolves of Winter is the third one, and I cannot remember the second one's name, but they were both very good, which I'm not doing it justice by not remembering the title. I want to say the second, one of them's like Lion's Heart or something, but anyway, they were very good. So that makes like 6 books I've read of Dan Jones so far. I'll put Summer of Blood up here. I was going to mention it here at the end, but I'm going to read Summer of Blood during quarter 2 for sure, and I might read The Crusades by Dan Jones as well. I'm not 100% sure if I will or not yet, because Templars covers the Crusades quite a bit. But of course, it covers everything from the time the Templars form to, and if you don't know that much about the Templars, it's a religious militant order, and people would go and dedicate their lives to this thing, but it just covers a lot of that stuff. That the land holdings, because they inherit, they would. Kings and other authority figures of Europe would donate stuff to them, including land. But it's just really interesting. And of course, it talks about the rivalry with the Teutonic Order, and then it talks a lot about how Philip the Fair kind of persecuted the Templars, and really they, there was some reason, they gave some kind of like false reasons for doing it, a sort of facade to kind of take their money, and that was really what it was about. They really just wanted the gold and the money from the Templars. But anyway, really interesting, really fascinating books. Dan Jones is a very good writer. I will say that of all the Dan Jones books I've read, that was probably my least favorite, with Henry V being my favorite book by him, and then probably The Plantagenets being my second favorite by Dan Jones. And then I really liked Essex Dogs a lot. So I would say Templars is probably my least favorite of him so far, but out of, what did I say, 5 books, 6 books now, I said Henry V, War of the Roses, The Plantagenets, 2 Essex Dogs, Templars. So 6 books I've read by Dan Jones. That's not too bad. One out of 6, I'll take that. And again, it really wasn't bad. Just my least favorite of the Dan Jones books so far. And War of the Roses has a really complicated narrative, and so does Templars, but it's still, I feel like War of the Roses worked a little bit better for me, but that's just my opinion. If you think I'm wrong, you can leave it in the comments. And I don't ask people to like and subscribe. I would rather people comment on the video. I mean, if you like the video, go ahead and like it, but definitely leave comments. If you've read any of these books or interested, have questions about any of them, have suggestions. I'll talk a little bit about what I'm going to read next, but I'll keep going for now. And then I've recently been in a reading project with Historathon, a buddy read, and we've been reading a lot of Harold Lamb. Harold Lamb's a great author. I'm not going to get into him a ton here. So Harold Lamb was a really very prolific writer in the pulps and Adventure magazine, but some others as well. But he also wrote a lot of nonfiction. So I had read Tamerlane by Harold Lamb before. I'll put this up there. So anyway, I was reading that stuff with Historathon, some of his pulp work, and I decided to read The March of the Muscovy by Harold Lamb. So I'll put the cover of that up here too. So Harold Lamb's his style of nonfiction would probably be considered outdated by today's standards because he has some dialogue inserts. But I will say I read this March of the Muscovy, and there really wasn't that much of that in there. There was a little bit, and it's hard to know discern what was actually are real quotes and what is his dialogue inserts. I think in the modern day, an author would just either speculate, like say, hey, this is speculative, or maybe just kind of give some insight of what he is thinking, what he thinks. But anyway, this March of the Muscovy is it's just a really great fluid narrative. Covers a lot of Ivan the Terrible, although it does briefly cover more early Russian history, like the Rus and some other stuff that Yaroslav and all that comes up before Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible is just a really fascinating historical figure, and it really made me want to read more Russian history, and I'll talk about that in a little bit at the end. I've always been fascinated by Eastern history and the Middle East, and even further east like China and Japan, but Russian history has always been really interesting to me. So you'll probably see more Russian history books on this channel throughout the rest of the year. Like I said, nonfiction has really been dominating my reading, and I've really been enjoying it. So, it's usually more like 50-50 for me. Like I always usually have one fiction book and one nonfiction book, but I've just been, blasting through this nonfiction. So I'm going to keep reading it. But anyway, those are my 5 nonfiction reads so far this month. But although I am currently reading 2 more nonfiction books, which is, I had to write one of them down. French and Indian War by Walter Bornemann. That's been very good. I'm about halfway through that. I'm going to continue to read it, although I paused it at the moment because I started reading A Great and Terrible King by Mark Morris. I think that was his name. Dang it. If I said that wrong, I'll put a correction in the descriptions. I didn't write the author's name down, so I apologize for that. I'm pretty sure that's it. I'm pretty sure it's Mark Morris, but I might be wrong. I just recently discovered him, and I saw that biography. It's A Great and Terrible King. It's a biography of Edward I, or Edward Longshanks, is how most people would know him. And I started reading it because I just wanted to test it. And like 50 pages in, I was like, yeah, I'm going to keep reading this. So I don't know if anyone else ever does that. Because I recently picked up the Civil War trilogy by Bruce Canton, and I started reading A Stillness at the I have the book right here. I don't want to say it wrong. Yeah. See, I'm going to say that word wrong. This book right here. I read about the first 100 pages of this, too. And I just wanted to test it, and I ended up reading a lot more. I was about probably like 75 pages in, and I was like, I either need to keep reading this or stop. And honestly, this is the 3rd one in the series, But this one won an award, so that's why I was kind of interested in it. I just wanted to try it. So obviously it reads pretty well if you just kind of blow through 75 pages. And like I said, I'm a decently fast, I'm probably an above average reader speed, but I'm not like an ultra fast reader. So I did read that like in like, I don't know, maybe like 2 hours or something, those 75 pages. I try not to do that because it just ends up bogging you down when you're kind of sampling too many books like that. But I do that on occasion. So, like I also sampled another Harold Lamb book just a couple of days ago just to see how I liked it. But so that's what I've read so far this month, nonfiction wise. I've read two. Well, I've been reading 3 fiction books. I'll come to the fiction at the end. So for anyone at Historathon, so I'll kind of talk about what else I'm going to read for Historathon. And since I already mentioned Mark Morris, he's got 2 other books. He's got quite a few books I'm really interested in. I'll put the first one up, which is the Norman Conquest. I'll put the cover right here. This covers like the Battle of Hastings and the invasion of England by William the Conqueror. So I'm going to read that sometime very soon. Definitely during Q2 or before that. So I'm really interested in that. I actually just ordered a special edition book or magazine from the Medieval War magazine, Medieval Warfare. That's about 1066. So maybe I'll just read those like kind of concurrently, and because one thing that's really great about that, the Medieval Warfare magazines, you get a lot of great photography and art, but they also do like breakdowns of like castles and all kinds of great stuff. It's a fantastic mag. I'm serious. Check out Medieval Warfare. I'll put a cover up. It's great. I made a whole video about it, about those magazines. So I read magazines personally. I just always have, and maybe that kind of keeps my book reading numbers down, but I don't know. I really enjoy them. So, and again, these magazines are really like excellently sourced. They're fantastic. So, check them out if you haven't seen them. He also has another book about castles. I think he has 2 of them, but I might be wrong about that. I love castles and cathedrals. I think they're great. I've been to the cathedral in Newark, but the ones from Europe are just a little bit more interesting because a lot of this stuff took them incredibly long amounts of time for them to build. Many of the cathedrals, like in England and all over Europe, took well over 100 years to make. Some of them, 200 years. And as a tradesman, it's hard to imagine working on something like that and not seeing it finished in your lifetime. And I think, in the modern day, most people just don't think like that. They don't think like, oh, my son will work on this and he'll finish it. So anyway, it's such a fascinating idea to me. And to me personally, the castles and cathedrals of Europe are just as interesting as the pyramids. A lot of this stuff was built before modern architecture, tactics, and before modern, mathematics, the advancements we have. And they use really cool techniques. Like there's this one they do where they'll take a string and a pencil and they'll use the string to draw a perfect radius. And that's how they would build the archways to doorways. And then they would chisel the stones by kind of like trial and error to get the shape they wanted. They would make templates, which would make it a little bit easier, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating to me. I probably just lost it. Anybody who's watching probably just turned it off because they don't care. So, but I think it's incredible. I think it's amazing what these guys were doing. So anyway, it's fascinating. Read Pillars of the Earth. That's a really great book. So anyway, I'll go ahead and cover some other stuff I might read. I already mentioned the 2 books I'm reading. I'm waiting on a Thomas Cromwell, A Revolutionary Life from my library. I've actually read another Thomas Cromwell biography before by Tracy, I think it's Bowman, and she has another book out that looks interesting to me. I can't remember what it is. I just saw it on Bookish Travels channel. I'll tag her in the description since I mentioned her channel. She has a really great channel. She seems like a really nice lady, so definitely check her out if you haven't seen her. She's really into Tudor history. I do like Tudor history. It's not one of my favorite eras, but Thomas Cromwell is fascinating to me. And so you might be wondering, why would you read a second biography about somebody? But Thomas Cromwell is a very interesting historical figure. So, and that was probably like 2018 when I read that. So instead of rereading the one I've already read, I'll just read this one. I don't know. It was maybe 2018. I guess I have to see what. Because I read it about the time it came out, and I honestly don't remember for sure when that came out. So I might be wrong about that. It's been a couple of years since I read it. So anyway, the next book these are all I kind of have on my list. I'll mention two of these kind of back to back. Empire of the Steppes by Kenneth Harrell. Kenneth Harrell, you might know from the Great Courses Plus series. As far as I know, this is his only narrative history book, but I have seen a lot of his Great Courses Plus content, and it's very good. Empire of the Steppes just basically covers a whole bunch of the Middle Eastern history. I know I talked a little bit about Attila the Hun and Tamerlane. And Tamerlane is one of my favorite historical figures to learn about. Anyway, just just everything. Again, I really like kind of that Near Eastern culture, but really just the East in general. That I feel like as a Westerner growing up, we just don't learn that much about the East. So it's just always been really fascinating to me to learn about that stuff. But I'm going to check that out. It's quite a big book. It's over 800 pages. So I might save it for March of the Mammoths. This one, and then I'll go ahead and mention the other one. This is Peter the Great, This Life and World, I think was the kind of subtitle to it. This is also like a 900-page book. So I might just say both of these for March of the Mammoths, and then I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone. And then a couple others I had down here. I really want to read this a lot, which is Shogun by A.L. Sandler. I'm A.L. Sandler. I'll put the cover up right here. This video's gonna have a bunch of editing. And the only thing I don't like about editing is I keep watching myself over and over. This is gonna be a long video, so I'm gonna try to hurry up and end it. I just saw the timer on my camera, but anyway, it looks really interesting about kind of the Shogun era of Japan, specifically what's kind of covered in the book Shogun. I can't remember the proper names of the historical figures off the top of my head, but anyway, but it covers that. If you've ever read Shogun by James Clavell, it covers that time period, so about roughly the same at least, and it looks really interesting. I was going to put this in a book. I'll hold this up too, because I don't know how much more ancient history I'm going to read for Historathon Q1, because like I said, my most interest, I have a lot of interest when it comes to history, to be honest, but my main interest would be Q2 and Q3. But I actually picked this up from Carson Publishers. I mentioned this book just a little bit in my magazine video, but they actually published this. This is kind of a lighter read because it's about 200 pages or so. Oh, look at this. I opened this up right to a fantastic map. So this covers Dacia during the Roman Empire. And it's not really a narrative history. It's a lot of like articles and essays. And it's just, oh man, there's so much great imagery in this. So this would be a bit, even though it's 200 pages, I could probably read this pretty fast. Because like I said, there's a lot of, visual imagery, paintings, photography. It's just, oh man, this is great. Oh, look at that. Look at that right there. But anyway, every time I actually ordered a couple of others. One that covers the Hussites, and then or Hussars, which is like a military regiment from like the Central Europe. And I picked up two others that also covered the Sengoku period of Japan. So that'll probably be included in my Q2 reading for Historathon. That and the books I just mentioned. Peter the Great would be Q3, and technically so would Thomas Cromwell. Oh, I'll mention the Sword of Persia, Nadir Shah, right here too. This looks like a really interesting book. Nadir Shah is just a really interesting, like, kind of commander in Iran during the Muscat era, and just a really interesting historical figure. I don't know that much about him, just a little bit, but I might read this too. So that's the stuff I got coming up. When I get those other books in, I'll show those off as well. I'll probably do a book haul video soon and include this in it. So anyway, I'm sorry this was such a long video. But yeah, that's my Historathon update. Well, I'm currently reading, I said what I was currently, I'm reading The Great and Terrible King, and then I'm also reading The French and Indian War by Walter Bornemann. Oh, I was going to cover my fiction reads too. I've been reading Swords of the East by Harold Lamb. I just made a video about him recently. I've also read a little bit of Conan, and then this month I actually read two Sharp series novels too. So I'll leave the fiction stuff out. I'll just make this mostly about the history stuff I've been reading. So anyway, that's all for today, YouTube. Good night or good day, wherever you're at.